How to judge art has been long up for debate, ever since Pokemon Red versus Pokemon Blue. How can we judge art objectively? We'll be going through various sets of ideas throughout history and seeing how they stack up. We'll be covering objectivist theories, moralist theories, and subjectivist theories to try to conclude which theory posits the best explanation for art. We're going to start with what the oldest person to talk about art and judging it and critiquing it, and the most likely to have been caught staring at Medusa. He was judging art by its ability to replicate or imitate reality. As Shakespeare said, to hold as it were a mirror up to nature. That art was trying to represent the form, and that all art was trying to represent something, even if that something was a little more immaterial, like sadness or truth. I think this definition leaves in too much of what art critiques would like to mean when they say good art, and not enough of what they mean when they say, that's not art or that's bad art. I think one example of this would be like the Colosseums. It's not really clear what the Colosseums are meant to represent. They seem to just represent themselves, but everything can represent itself. So it seems like everything is art or nothing is art, which I don't think it's too good of a standard, and it's definitely not too good of a standard for beauty. Accepts everything as infinitely beautiful because everything represents itself to the fullest degree. I think the best thing this theory does, which I think Nelson Goodman really represents well, is that a lot of things have a very weird niche interpretation. Like, it's very unclear what you're trying to get out of them. Like dance, music, architecture, abstract paintings, which seem to represent nothing. Nelson attempts to bridge this gap. Nelson says that these objects may hold representation of metaphorical attributes like movement, dynamism, or jazz. To him, a photo of a sad red apple expresses sadness in the same way it's expressing paintingness or appleness. It seems many properties of a work of art are not symbolisms, but in fact literalisms, and are properties of the work itself. I think this has the same problem as Plato, is that everything becomes art and everything becomes infinitely beautiful. I really don't think it's a good definition. I think art can actually have a lot of great emotions and beauty that comes from those emotions. I think, my favorite is, that drop in exit music for a film at, right by the end. And he's like, do, and the drums start going, and the car's like, and he's going, I have no clue what he's saying, but it hits me every time, man. He go crazy with it. Just, gets me in my feels with it. That's what some of these philosophers were saying is, really good art. Your ability to make you feel. That's why R.J. Collingwood said good or bad art is whether it fulfills its purpose. Saying something is good or bad is implying its success or failure. We have good harvests and bad thunderstorms. The success and failure is implied on our own. We mean that these things enable us to fulfill our goals or not fulfill our goals. When we call something good or bad in and of itself, though, we mean that the attributes of it have succeeded their goals or that they have failed their goals. Art is meant to be purposeful and definitive, so that we can tell whether the work succeeded or failed. What a student learns at art school isn't just blindly drawing with the brush until the teacher tells them exactly every single line to make. In fact, instead, they are looking at their strokes and their brushes and redoing it and saying, oh, that one doesn't look right. They are watching themselves paint. They are turning the physical process of just going up and down with the brush into a work of art by becoming conscious of it, by being oh, that wasn't right, that one doesn't look right, oh, that one looks right. That by imagining their creative process. I mean, this is why Roger thought people who made bad art were mentally corrupt. That so he said, quote, the corruptions of consciousnesses are always partial, and temporary lapses in activity, on the whole, is successful in doing what it tries to do. A person who on one occasion fails to express himself is a person quite accustomed to expressing himself successfully on other occasions, through comparison of this occasion with his memory of these other. Therefore, he ought to be able to see that he has failed this time to express himself. Corruption of consciousness is not a recondite sin or a remote calamity which overcomes only an unfortunate or accursed few. It is a constant experience in the life of every artist, and his life is a constant and on the whole successful warfare against it. But this warfare always involves a very present possibility of defeat, and then a certain corruption becomes inveterate. Roger doesn't think that art is supposed to be moral, or that it's bad if it's immoral, because he acknowledges that all of us have thoughts every day that, if revealed to the public, would make us shrink in horror. Bad art is not the expression of these emotions. In fact, bad art is the hiding of these emotions by disowning them. And in fact, these bad, quote-unquote, bad emotions are the cornerstone of art. To me, a game that's a perfect example of this, of a game that's trying to communicate an experience, is Getting Over It by Bennett Foddy. It is a game about starting over. You play the whole game as a naked man in a pot trying to climb a mountain with various pieces of trash scattered about the mountain that conveniently let you climb all the way up. And you're climbing by swinging a hammer because you have no legs. There are no save points, checkpoints. If you fall all the way to the bottom. This game is ruthless, it's hard. It took me 20 hours and a few times I cried a few times trying to get through this game the first time because I'm not very good at video games, but I really loved it. I think it really is about getting over it. I mean, the narrator says it's trying to replicate the feeling of deleting your homework the day it was before it was due, or betting all your money on red when it turns out black. So I think the game has a lot of soul and character, and it really tries to get you those emotions of starting over. I've always hated starting over in my life. Like, it's been really painful for me. It's something I really had to get overcome. And I think this game does it really well. And it even tries to sell, like, the most complicated feeling to me is the joy of starting over. Like, obviously, you get through the game and you get set back, and that's like a normal part of it, but you keep playing for whatever reason. Like, you could just turn off the game. Video games are supposed to be fun. And that's why I chose this work for its communication of emotions, because I think it communicates a very unique emotion, that being the emotion of starting over and starting again, and the joy of starting over. And I think it does it really well, so that's why I thought it was a really good example of that mimesis, or like copying nature, copying some idea. And also, look at this absolute nerd, loser, no life, beating it in 59 seconds. This guy did not struggle. This guy did not start over. This guy did not fail. Anytime he made the slightest mistake, he would not fall. He would not take it. He would not take those defeats and accept them. He would just restart and say, you know what, I'm done with it. I'm going to reset the run. I'm not going to take any of my defeats or mistakes. To take a work and one set of motions to take from a work, I think is just flat out wrong. And I also think that idea that Roger had of one work representing one emotion or fact about it is wrong. And I don't think you can judge a work by how well it expresses the creator's ideas, because works will not always have one clear interpretable idea, and many people may take different things from a work, and so it becomes very hard to judge which works are better objectively. This is where we get to the subjectivist camp, who think that the value of an art, how we can judge art, is subjective. David Hume was one of these thinkers. He thought that it ultimately came down to ourselves, but that this answer wasn't very satisfactory. Hume thought there was no way to objectively judge art due to several factors. He thought that taste was very varied among people. He said taste can't be right or wrong, as it refers solely to itself, and no sentiments can tell you what's objective about it. I could tell you the exact description of a piece of art, and I could say, okay, it's a painting of a woman and she's smiling, and you would have no idea whether the painting was bad or good or not. It's no property of the object itself. Even though we can make rules about art, these rules are quite fast and loose, and the taste of men are much more complicated than adages like creativity and perfection can capture. It also seems that a subject's opinion of a work may change over time, or based on their state of mind, or whether they give proper reflection to a work, or how much attention they give to a work. Dua Lipa's Dance the Night Away was not a hit single until the Barbie movie came out and everybody realized, oh my god, this shit slaps, right? So they listened to it. At first, oh, whatever, but then Barbie movie came out and people were like, oh my god, this is good. Hume still believed in some kind of baseline taste that all humans shared. He thought there might have been some low standard that all humans had, even though it was a bit fuzzy around the edges. He said, someone who asserts that there is an equality of genius and elegance between Drake and Kendrick would be thought to defending something as extravagant as declaring a molehill to be as high as the Matterhorn, or a pond as wide as the Atlantic. Perhaps there are people who prefer Drake, but no one pays attention to people with such a taste, and we don't hesitate to say that the sentiments of these purported critics is absurd and ridiculous. Another person who was also a subjectivist was Clive Bell, who was an English art critic, and was what he thought was common among of all art, like all subjectivists, was provoking aesthetic emotions. He said, obviously there's no objective way to judge art, because, come on guys, it's art. Obviously there's no objective way to judge it. But any system that claims to have objective validity is palpably ridiculous and not even worth discussing. I think this model is pretty strong for describing subjective goodness as provoking aesthetic emotions. But I think it does have all the typical subjectivist failings, which I will get to later. Susan Langner was of a similar subjectivist camp, and she's our third subjectivist of the day. And she thought that art was a projection of feelings, that we could judge art by how well it projected feelings. Not a spontaneous feeling, but an understanding of a feeling being communicated. She says that she is of a similar project to Collingwood, and saying that art contains knowledge of a feeling, but not the feeling itself. What any true artist, painter, or poet, it doesn't matter, tries to recreate is not a yellow chair, a hay wain, or a morally perplexed prince as a symbol of emotions, but the quality which he has once known, the emotional value that events, situations, sounds, or sights in their passing have had for him. He need not represent those same items of his experience. When he finds a theme that excites him, it is because he thinks it is in his rendering of it he can endow with some such quality, which is really a way of feeling. Okay, now that we've gone through every single subjectivist argument for art, I think we should get to the objections. To me, I think the most clear objections to subjectivism is one, that not every piece of art has one clear interpretation, or one interpretation at any point in time or to one person. So, the weight of an artwork would be constantly changing. Two, it seems a lot of artworks seem to represent nothing, like an abstract painting or a dance. And then thirdly, I think there's this kind of art called craft, which is like a table or architecture or anything emotionless, where like there is no emotion to take from it. It is just beauty in and of itself. Like when I see a pretty table, I'm not like taking in emotions from it, but I can accept that it's good art. That's why we get to the moralist camp, who think both subjectivists and objectivists are dumb, and that we should be seeking a third definition of art. Leo Tolstoy thought that there were two prevalent systems of beauty. One that was subjectivist, that thought that beauty came from pleasure or emotions, and objectivist, which thought that beauty came from the perfect, the good, the spirit, or God. But Leo doesn't think that any of these theories are particularly convincing. He says, there are, and it could not be otherwise, only two definitions of beauty. The one objective, mystical, merging this conception into that of the highest perfection, God, a fantastic definition, founded on nothing. The other, on the contrary, a very simple, intelligible, and subjective one, which considers beauty to be that which pleases. But all attempts to define what taste is must lead to nothing, as the reader may see both from the history of aesthetics and experimentally. There is and can be no explanation of why one man is pleased by something and why one man is displeased by another thing. Seeing that there was no one true definition or any true definitions of good art or beauty, Leo instead calls for his morality in art to be the main factor that we consider. To say whether a piece of art is good or bad is to say whether it is moral or not. He was not a big fan of Oscar Wilde, saying that his works denied morality and that his works praised vice. Some of artistic standards that Leo upholds are Phidias, Sophocles, Homer, Titian, Raphael, Bach, Beethoven, Dante, Shakespeare, and Goethe. Though, even when talking about Shakespeare, he's only talking about some of the pieces. Leo still finds Romeo and Juliet to be a story promoting immoral values and saying that Romeo and Juliet is bad. And saying that saying that Romeo and Juliet is bad art seems a bit hypocritical, all the other systems are also stupid. So this is a fine concession to make. My biggest objection with this is that obviously not all good art is good. I mean, he even says Romeo and Juliet is, aesthetically pleasing, but not good. It's a weird thing to say. Or, the 16th best-selling book of all time is called Lolita, and it is about a man who kidnaps his stepdaughter and rapes her. And it was called just Unfiltered Vice. Obviously, the system of which we use to judge a piece of art aesthetically should not be the same one we use to judge it morally, which is why I find his system to be a bit incomplete. To conclude, I think, honestly, there is no one system for defining whether art is good or bad. If you want to use an objectivist one, if you want to use a subjectivist one, if you want to use a moralist one, that's fine, I don't really care.